But my name is Vera Cabero, and I am, as of 2 days ago, the statewide emerging technologies consultant for the Department of Public Instruction. Previously, I was the Western Region consultant up until a couple days ago, but I'll be taking on this new role. I've been doing a lot with AI already for the past several months, a year and a half or so, and now I'll be kind of moving into that full time, as well as what other exciting technologies come down the way. And so today we're talking about the balancing the benefits with the limitations, ethics, and concerns. Because as most of you probably already know, AI does have a lot of potential to really level the playing field for our students that struggle. It has been proven in case after case in the workforce that the lower performing workers benefit much more than the higher performing workers. And it has the same effect on our students, those students who struggle for whatever reason, whether it is disability, language barriers, socioeconomic status, they're struggling in school. This is the kind of tool that can really help them to excel. But it does come with a lot of ethical concerns, and we have to be very careful to navigate those and handle them in a very balanced way. And so our North Carolina AI guidelines, which we'll look at the end, do take a very balanced approach, and we're going to kind of look at that today. The link that you see on the screen is also on the Google Doc, but that is the link to my presentation. If you want to join it, if you're the kind of person that likes to have it in another tab, you're certainly welcome to do that. But all the links that you need will be on the Google Doc as well if you don't want to manage multiple tabs right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, let people in as needed, but okay, so first of all, just a welcome. I've already kind of introduced who I am. My contact information is there, though, if there's a way that I can help you. I will be serving in a statewide role now. So for districts and regional events, I'm always happy to come out and facilitate sessions or whatever if needed. The objectives today, we're going to talk about an overview of AI in education. We're going to look at both the benefits and the challenges, some misconceptions that we need to make sure and address when we're teaching our teachers and our students about AI literacy, and then also just address individually some of the big limitations and concerns that we have. And we'll take a little look at our guidelines and what it has to say. And we will do a little bit of prompting along the way. So if you have a large language model that you like to use, then you certainly can have that open on the screen, and it would be beneficial to you to be able to, if it works for you, to be able to prompt while we're working together. And so just a little historical overview. This is a very brief and not very detailed historical overview, but it is important for folks to know that AI in education did not start in January of 2022. It's been used for quite a while in education. Any of the tools that you've ever used in which there was any kind of a predictive analysis where students were given a different set of problems based on their processes that they were doing, how they were achieving in the work they were completing, that uses a form of AI, and there's lots of other types of AI that have been used. The new thing that happened in 2022, of course, was ChatGPT, which brought about generative AI. And I'm not going to go into great detail about that. I went through that in my AI 101 session a couple of weeks ago. And so for today, we're just going to keep it very general about the history of AI, but just so that folks know it's not new. Just the generative piece that creates content is what is new. So the current landscape, then, that brings us to the current situation in which ChatGPT brought on an onslaught of hundreds, thousands even, of other generative AI apps. And since then, since that November of 2022, the capabilities of these models has really developed at like warp speed, lightning speed. And so to begin with, if you were an early adopter as I was when ChatGPT first came out, the only thing it could do is you could put text in and it could give you text back. And so it was clearly and strictly a text-based model. And very soon thereafter, they added image creation. And then very soon after that, they started being these tools that will create video and music, even singing songs to you, like things like Suno and Udio that came out that will actually create full songs and sing them to you. And I remember several months ago, I was using ChatGPT in a session having teachers create song lyrics, and they said, well, is there a tool that can sing it to you? And at that time there was not, but already since then there are two of those tools that I know of, and there are probably more, that will actually create a song, make music, and sing it to you. And so just the speed that these things are developing at is remarkable. And that brings us to the future prospects, because I and many other experts in the field do not feel like it's slowing down anytime soon. Like, we've seen remarkable changes just in the last few months with the ability to speak in natural language, to have real time conversations, to create charts, graphs, and just so many things are happening so quickly that I think in the future we're going to see that it revolutionizes education anymore, even more than it has so far. And really, there's going to be a lot of things going on that combine AI with virtual reality and augmented reality. And of course, sometime in the near future, there will probably be supercomputers and lots of other things that are happening, so that it's not going to change anytime soon. And a lot of people feel like it's too late, that they've already kind of missed the boat, but now is a good time to get in and kind of start learning about it if you haven't, because it will keep developing, and what you learn now will be kind of the baseline that will help you navigate what happens in the future. And so we're going to talk a little bit about benefits first of all, and I've already addressed them a little bit, but the ability of AI to personalize learning is one of its greatest benefits, and to allow teachers to create personalized learning for their students, because it can analyze, first of all, and the predictive models can analyze student performance and actually help create tailored lessons for them. But with a teacher who knows how to prompt, and I'm not going to go deep into prompting today either, because I don't have 4 hours for the webinar, but I did do a session on the power of prompting recently. But with a teacher who really knows how to prompt and knows how to provide adequate context in a prompt, they can create lessons that are tailor-made for their students, their individual students, or their class, by providing a lot of context about those students, which really helps to tap in, make them culturally relevant to the students, tap into their interests, and also to address their areas of strength and weaknesses. It is also, of course, a huge time saver for teachers. And we all know, if you're in education, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that time is the thing that teachers need the most of. If you ever ask a teacher if they could have anything to help them, they would want money. Rates pretty high up as well. But time, I think, probably would even rank higher. And these tools, again, used skillfully by a teacher who learns how to use them and how to prompt effectively, can really help with helping them save time and creating content, working as a brainstorming partner, even evaluating and providing some feedback on student work and meaningful interactions. But another really great benefit to these is the enhanced accessibility, and that's becoming more prominent all the time, because the technologies now have the capability, they have vision capabilities. So for a blind person or a visually impaired person, you can actually use the Chat GPT app on your phone even, and have it scan areas for you and show you what's there and tell you about what's there, as well as the text to speech, which is fluid now on Chat GPT on the app version as well. You can have real live time conversations. And if you are a person who can't type well, can't read well, and that interaction of text to text doesn't work for you, that can be super helpful. I also find it very helpful to me because I drive a lot. And so I use that feature of ChatGPT a lot when I'm driving. I just put my phone up and I'll launch the app, and then we will plan together as I'm driving. And I will, speak my prompt instead of typing it. And then it will respond and I'll respond. And we have done some great planning together on the road on I-40. And so it really helps with breaking down those barriers. And we have a consultant, Donna Murray, who many of you know, who does a whole session on using AI to break down those accessibility barriers. And so it has lots of benefits, and that makes it worth the navigating and mitigating the concerns. I'm sorry, I'm clicking a little too fast, but we do want to talk. We'll go into each one of these a little more deeply, but the potential challenges that we're dealing with that are of huge concern. One of them is data privacy. And that makes it very difficult for people in your CTO positions in your districts to allow certain apps because there's a lot of concern about student data being protected. And so there's a lot of evaluation that has to be done before these apps can be instituted in the classroom. And we'll dig into that a little more. But of course, equity and access. This is one of my biggest concerns. And I've already talked a little bit about the power these tools have. But because they are so powerful, they have the potential also of really increasing the digital divide if we are not equitably instituting them in all of our schools. And I'm very concerned about our lower socioeconomic students and those other marginalized groups, those in rural communities, inner city communities, as well as students with disabilities, making sure that they have equal access to these tools as well. And I think that's really important that we as educators and as education leaders make allowances to make sure that happens, because if not, what's going to happen is only those students who have the means at home, they have the internet, they have the devices, they have people at home to guide them, they have the money to pay for subscriptions. Those are going to only be the only students that learn how to use these tools. And these tools are already having a drastic impact on the job market. And so if that is the case, those students who rely on schools for use of devices and internet and learning these technologies are going to be competing in a job force a workforce that is going to be largely favoring students who have AI skills. And there was a recent Microsoft study that came out that I shared in one of my previous presentations, where they reviewed, or they interviewed hundreds of thousands of CEOs, and 66% of them that they interviewed said that they would not hire anybody without AI skills. And then there was like 71% said that they would hire someone with less experience and AI skills over someone with more experience without AI skills. And so the impact that it's having on the workforce is already happening. This isn't some future impact that's going to be 10 or 15 years down the road. That was in May of 2024. And so if we're not making sure all of our students have equitable access, we are further handicapping the students that struggle already. And so that's a huge concern. One of our driving forces in our AI guidelines is to try to make sure that happens. Of course, there's also the concern of over-reliance on the technology, and we have to teach our students not to do that. It's just like with the internet. I was around when the internet came about. I was teaching in the early 2000s, and we went through the same kind of thing, the same kind of uproar about the internet, because kids could just go on there and find information and copy and paste it in and claim it as their own. And Chat GPT and these tools, of course, make it easier for students to do that. But we had to go through a period of training our students and teaching them and modeling for them and reinforcing that on how not to do that, how to still do their own thinking and use the internet as a tool, because it was something they needed in their futures. And we're going to have to address AI in the same way, because they're going to need to learn to use it. If it's used correctly, it can be a help to your critical thinking, not a hindrance. And then, of course, this is a big one, a teacher adaptation. And all of you obviously are spending one of your very few free days of the year here in the afternoon with me right before a holiday. So you're not the teachers that we're most concerned about, obviously, but it is going to be a big challenge to make sure that all of our teachers are, one, becoming AI literate themselves so that they can guide their students, but also just providing them adequate training so they can understand how to use these tools effectively and how to teach students to use them in a way that supplements their own thinking and their own creativity instead of replacing it. And so those are some of the challenges that we're facing and addressing at the state level. And we'll be doing some things this year to kind of help address some of those. But we also need to look at some misconceptions, and especially when you're talking about working with students, there's a lot of misconceptions that we need to address, but also with teachers, because there's still, I think one of the recent studies I saw said that still about 70% of teachers have used it a little bit, but only 25% have had any training. And so a lot of teachers may be even under some of these misconceptions. So we need to make sure we're understanding them. And this is a big one, because we tend to trust machines more than we trust people. We need to make sure people understand that these tools are not omniscient. They do not have all of the information in the world. They have a huge data set, but it is a limited data set. There are things that are not going to be in their data set. And we also need to make sure that we know that they're not perfect. They do make mistakes, and that part of that is AI literacy. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail about that. That was part of my AI 101 session a couple of weeks ago. But if you understand how the models work, that becomes easier to understand, because basically it is just a very, very complex word prediction system. Just like on your phone, when you start typing and it suggests words, which you may or may not want it to provide, it's just doing a statistical analysis of what the most likely next word is. And that's the way AI works as well. And so, because of that, there will be mistakes. Sometimes it will make mistakes and it will be inaccurate. It's not perfect. For students in particular, the second one is a big one. We need to make sure we call it anthropomorphizing AI, which is basically giving it human characteristics. But for our students, we have to be very, very conscious of giving them, again, it's the reason why I always say everybody needs to learn about AI before they learn with AI, because students are more likely to have this misconception that it is a human, because these tools already in a year and a half, I've seen a drastic improvement in the tools that makes them much more human-like than they were in November and December of 2022. You could easily pick out AI generated text at that time, and now you simply can't. Especially a skillful prompter can write a prompt such that you cannot tell the difference. And so for our students, in a world where they can go to the GPT store and find any number of girlfriend, boyfriend prompts, there are things like Replica, which they can create their own prompt based on someone else's text. And there's several other things. There are people that are using them even for counseling. There's some situations where people are using them as for a counselor to talk about their emotional issues. And so all of that makes me even more concerned about this issue. So as teachers, we've got to make sure we stress that over and over with students. And one thing that we can do is just be very careful with the language that we use when we're talking about AI. And we talk about this in our guidelines a little bit as well. But whenever you're like, if you're demonstrating something with AI before a class, it's very easy to say something like, oh, it didn't like that, or that made it mad. And when you do that, you are kind of giving it those human characteristics. And that's something that we have to be very careful about, not calling it a he or a she, and always addressing it as a it, and explaining to students that it's just making a calculation. It's not thinking, it's just calculating. It's just doing a statistical calculation. And so that all comes with that AI literacy. And we're going to talk a lot about AI literacy next week in next week's session. But this AI is not infallible. That kind of, that kind of goes to the omniscient one. We need to make sure our students know that and demonstrate that and practice that critical thinking of evaluating responses and helping them see when AI does make a mistake. It's frustrating, but it's also a learning opportunity. And so if you ever are doing a prompt and AI makes a mistake, I would make sure and save that prompt and save it and use it as a teaching tool. And then they also need to understand that these things are not autonomous. We'll tell you there are things that they do that even their developers don't understand, which is a little bit frightening and disturbing, but they're not autonomous. That chat GPT is not going to do anything without you providing it context and a prompt and asking it to do something. And so those are all just some misconceptions to be aware of that we as educators need to make sure and help dispel those things when we're dealing with AI or talking about AI with our students. So the next thing is that concern about people offloading all of their thinking to AI. And that is a very valid concern because we all know, like right now, a lot of students are using it undercover, they're using it without disclosing the use of it. And that is probably happening. A lot of teachers suspect this happening, but we have to train them not to do that. We have to demonstrate for them how to use it to improve your critical thinking. And so, one really good one is just always questioning the outputs. Anytime that you're using an AI tool and get a prompt, and get a response, you really have to be critically evaluating that prompt and demonstrating that for students, how that you're doing that, how are you evaluating it, and then understanding the limitations. And really the only way to fully understand the limitations is within your own context, is to use it. Try Ethan Malik, who's a now famous professor who teaches a lot about AI. He says to invite AI to the table. Everything you do, always invite it to the table. And so in your daily work life, which of course will be different from mine and everybody else on here, try doing all the things that you do with AI. And you'll see very quickly what things it's good at and what things it's not good at. There are things that it can't do well. It can't count words, for example. If you tell it to give you a 500-word essay, it'll give you an essay, and then if you go to Google Docs and count the words, it will never be 500 because it doesn't know how to do that. It sees things in tokens, and so it doesn't count words. And so you have to kind of learn those things, what it can do well, what it can't, and that's only something that can be done by using it. And then developing your own AI literacy is really important, and helping develop the AI literacy of your students. And digital literacy is something we've been talking about for a long time. But in today's world, if students are not AI literate, they're not digitally literate. And so we need to start making sure we're incorporating that AI literacy into our curriculums and training our students. And again, we'll be doing a lot of work with that AI literacy next week. But we also need to be sure that we're, especially if you're dealing with high school students, middle and high school, I think it's really important to kind of talk to them and demonstrate them about deep fakes and fake images, fake text, fake videos, all of those things that are being created, because they need to be really critical consumers of the media they consume. And so those are all, whoops, oh, wow, I'm sorry, I just went way too fast. Okay, so as educators, responsible use for educators looks a whole lot like responsible use for students, but I did throw in a couple of other things in there that apply only to educators. But one of them is for content creation. I mean, you can definitely save yourself 12 hours a week in creating content, no matter what subject matter you teach. And it can help you just become it just gives you access to so much more knowledge and so much more information. So even just as a brainstorming partner, it can save you tremendous amounts of time. And again, skillful prompting will help you to do that better, because the more context you provide one of these models, the more likely you're going to get something that works for exactly what you're looking for, which is 1,000 times better than going on Google and searching for it and then finding something that kind of works that you have to completely remake and adjust so that it suits your needs and your students' needs. With AI, you can actually make things that are custom made for you without having to just appropriate something somebody else made. But of course, we have to also make sure that we're evaluating that content. I have not heard of it happening in North Carolina, thankfully, but I have heard of in some other places where teachers have used AI to create content but didn't evaluate it carefully and had misinformation in it. So they had what they call hallucinations or inaccuracies, and they passed on that misinformation to their students. And so as educators, of course, you should know your content much better. You should be in a much better place to pick out the hallucinations. And we're going to do some work with that today. But it's really important that we're evaluating carefully for hallucinations and bias. And we're going to talk about both of those. Another one is administrative support, doing things like creating those emails, creating those newsletters, any of those things like that you have to do. And even now with the vision capabilities, there's so much more that you can do. You can put, handwritten text that students write. You can analyze that, even math problems. I mean, the vision capabilities allow a lot more potential for saving you time on administrative task, but it can be a big time saver for those things. And I encourage people to try it and use it for those. But evaluating student work is another huge one. I was an English language arts and social studies teacher for 14 years, and I feel like I spent half of those 14 years grading papers, grading written work, because that's what we do in English and social studies, lots of that. And this is something that could have really been beneficial to me, and I hope that it will be beneficial to other teachers, because it will, first of all, it gives you an unbiased, objective opinion, because we all know that when you've got 90 papers to grade, you start on papers 1 through 10, you're feeling pretty good. By the time you get to about 60 or 70, you're just kind of, not so happy anymore. And you're probably not quite as objective as you were on the first one, because they're making the same mistake that 70 before made that. And it's really hard to be objective. And if you see the kid's name, the kid, maybe he threw a pencil the day before. And, it's just really hard. So using AI to create those formative assessments like comments, completing rubrics, things like that, is a really good way to save you a lot of time. But it's just really important to understand that the models of today are not, they're not ready for prime time. They're not ready to just hand off all your grading to, obviously, without that human in the loop. And we talk about that a lot, and I'm sure you've heard that before. And so, yes, it can save you a lot of time, but you still need to read the work, and you still need to read the comment, and you need to make sure that they match up. But you can feed a paper along with a rubric into one of your AI models and ask it to evaluate it based on the rubric. And it does a pretty good job, in my opinion, most of the time. And you might look over it and it's fine. But if you ever do see something you need to change, you just need to make sure that you have evaluated it. I did hear one horror story of a college student, not a K-12 student, recently, who said that they turned in a paper, and we'll get to AI detectors in a minute. That's another equity issue, but the professor returned it to them and said that it was AI generated, and they were going to get a 0 on it and going to be put on probation. And they told the professor, I swear I did not use AI at all. I handwrote it all. I can show you my notes. And he said, well, I guess I better read the paper then. And so he hadn't even read the paper. He just used AI completely to generate it, and then wanted to fail her for using AI to create it. And so we've got to be really careful about that, and making sure that we are still being the human in that loop. We know our kids, and evaluating all of our work and evaluating the AI's output. But it can save a tremendous amount of time if it's used the right way for formative feedback. Okay. To my next one, it wants to move all at once or none. Okay, so we've moved. Okay, so that brings me to AI detectors. And this is a hot topic. It has been for several months, but I just want to lay it out there, no bones about it. AI detectors do not work, period. They are not an equitable solution to trying to make sure that we have academic integrity in our schools. And if you go to a meeting with one of these people who sell these tools, they will sell you the moon, and it will sound like the best thing ever. And they'll talk about how accurate they are. But there have been study after study done that prove that they're not nearly as accurate as these people say they are. And so they have both false positives, and they have a lot of false negatives. And the truth of the matter is, there's never going to be one that is effective, in my opinion, because, as I've already said earlier, I've used these tools since they first came out, and I will tell you that right now they're already to the point with a good prompter that you cannot tell the difference between human generated text and AI generated text. They don't say at the beginning; they would say in conclusion at the end, and they use delve, and they used all of these words that no real people use. They just don't do that anymore. They're getting more and more human-like. The more human text, the more people use them, they're better able to imitate that human interaction. And so the AI detector tools are not going to be able to advance at the speed that the AI itself is advancing. And so I don't think it's ever going to be a tool that will actually evaluate them effectively. And I've linked here a study. If you're interested in reading a study, it's a very thorough study that also looks at the effects of after they found the false negatives increase dramatically if you just take the output and you edit it a little bit before you turn it in, change a few of the words around, the accuracy went down to like 34%. And that is all over TikTok, it's all over Snap, it's all over all social media. Any kid who wants to know, just go type in how do you beat an AI detector? They're going to get 500 videos that show them how to do that. And so that is an interesting study. I also want to point out, if you haven't heard, they're also very inequitable. They they've been proven time and time again that they will tag the writing of non-native English speakers as AI generated at a much higher rate than native English speakers. And so that's a problem. Also, the paid versions of these tools do a much better job of emulating human speech than the non-paid versions. So that means that your higher socioeconomic status students who can afford to pay for $20 for every single one of these, Chat GPT, Claude, Perplexity, are going to have a much better advantage than the ones who are having to use the free tools. And so it's really that it puts us at risk, and I just really recommend you not use them. And there's another study there if you're interested in reading some of the research that I've read, something there from The Guardian, which talks about that. And then also, this is the bigger picture. It's just short-sighted. Trying to think that we're going to use a tool to detect AI and we're going to run around and play policeman all the time in our classrooms, that is short-sighted, because eventually in the very near future, pretty much everything's going to be written with AI, if not by AI. And these students are going to graduate. I've already talked about that Microsoft study a little bit. They're going to graduate into a world that expects them to be able to work with these tools. And so if we've spent all of our time there in high school policing it and telling them not to use it and not teaching them how to use it, then we're really not, we're doing them a disservice. We're not preparing them for that world that they're graduating into. And so instead, we've really got to adapt, and it's going to be a painful adaptation. And like I said, I'm a recovering English teacher myself. And so I understand the concerns, and they're valid concerns, but we're in a whole different era now. Things have changed so drastically in the last year and a half, and education really has to change with it. We've got to change our ideas about assessment and instruction to work in this AI-enabled world, because we can't stop that world. It's already here, and it's going to be here. The kids that we teach are going to be living in it a lot longer than we are. And so there's another really great research paper here by Leon Furzy, who's kind of a leading thinker in this field as well. And all of those are available if you want to analyze them a little further later on. But I'm going to have to move on. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed up. But this is something that we've included in our guidelines as well about AI detectors, and I won't belabor it because I've said most of it. All these things on the left, or on the right in particular, I've already said. But on the left, we talk about kind of what are we going to do instead then? If we can't detect it, it's not possible to detect it, it's not possible to ban it. All the kids are going to have access to it on their phones and anywhere else. So we've got to think of how we're going to adapt our education to work with it. And one of them, a big one, is making sure that we're giving our students the information instead of treating it as a taboo subject like we did social media, which I think we've done a really poor job, honestly, of preparing our students for the world they live in social media. And a lot of times we're reaping the results of that when we're having to deal with discipline problems all day and every day over cyberbullying and things that are happening on cyberbullying on social media, because we didn't really address that in schools. We might have done a 1 hour a year to check a box to say we gave them digital literacy, but students haven't really learned it. And so we need to make sure that we're having those conversations and giving students that AI literacy that they need to understand the tools and understand the ethical implications that go along with it. Collecting writing samples is also good. Of course, we have to always be concerned about accessibility with the students who are not able to handwrite things. But sometimes, there will be a time when you just have students write and there is no AI, and that's perfectly fine. And then you have those samples to see what students can do on their own. And if a student can only write on a fourth grade level on their own, and they come in and bring you a college level paper, you don't need an AI detector to tell you that something's amiss there. Your own intuition and knowing those students will tell you that. And then, capturing their reflections on their collaborative processes, having them do some metacognition, which is also a really good critical thinking strategy, having them explain how they drew the conclusions they drew, and thinking about collaboration with AIs like working with a tutor. That's basically every kid has access to multiple tutors now. And so kind of thinking of it in that regard, and then have ideas about how for students share about how much AI was used. And we'll get to the point in just a minute. We're going to be looking at some things that we have in our guidelines that talk about that. But I do want to dive in a little bit to hallucinations. And I will say that that's really not a term that in the education community we like, because it does kind of humanize the AI and makes light of mental illness, but that's the term that was assigned to it. I prefer like the term inaccuracies. And we've talked about why it does it already, because it's predicting. But Dan Fitzpatrick, who's the AI educator, author of the book, The AI Classroom, he called it plausible sounding random falsehoods. And I think that is a really, really great definition of it, because they do sound plausible. They're not going to be very obvious. They're not going to be some crazy outlandish thing that just sticks out. It's going to be included, and it's going to be very easy to overlook if you're not critically evaluating it. And so they occur when the system generates some inaccurate information. We've talked a little bit about what causes them. It could be gaps in the training data. It could be that the prompt was not detailed enough, and the AI really didn't know what you were looking for, and so it just made something up. I think I have somebody who is not muted. I'm getting a little echo. Let me mute real quick. Okay. Okay, and it could be a lot of different things, but also these systems are they're just built to please. So they want to give you what you ask for. And if what you're asking for is not something that they have in their database or not something they can find, they make it up, and it sounds very plausible. They don't say, "Hey, I don't really know that, but it could be this." They will just spit it out as if it's fact. And that's just part of the way they work. And so again, the developers do not know how to fix that. It has improved drastically. Again, if you were an early adopter using it last December, the hallucinations were much more common than they are in today's models. But also the paid models have less hallucinations than the free models. And so that's that equity issue. And so it has improved, but I don't know that there'll ever be a time when they completely eliminate it, because if they do, they will squelch the creativity in the models, because part of what makes them creative is this randomness where they're able to just kind of come up with stuff that is original and not and creative. And so if they take away all of the randomness, they might be more accurate, but they wouldn't be near as creative or near as able to come up with like songs and things like that we like for them to do. So the frequency varies depending on the model and the task. They're more common in open-ended generation tasks than narrowly defined fact-based queries. And so the more limited your query is, the more detail you give it, the less likely you are to get a hallucination. And also, if you give it a reference text, you're less likely to get a hallucination. So, for example, if I just go into Chat GPT and I say, tell me what the green light means in Great Gatsby or whatever, I might get a hallucination. But if I feed it the text of the Great Gatsby and say, based on this text, what does it mean? It's going to be a lot more likely to give me a correct answer and not a hallucination. And so that makes a difference. Recognizing them, it requires knowledge. If I were to use Chat GPT to give me some really detailed scientific information about global warming, I'm not a science teacher. I'm not an expert in global warming. I very likely could miss a hallucination because I don't have the context knowledge. And so these tools work better for people who know the content. Otherwise, you really have to be careful and make sure that you fact check and verify. And so the impact, while we're worried about it, obviously, spread of misinformation, we don't want to be giving our students inaccurate information, inaccurate facts and details. I was at ISTE last week, and one of the presenters there had actually told a story about, and I forget which president was, forgive me for that, but one of the presidents, they had a tool that was emulating the president, and the kids were interacting with him, asking questions. And one of the kids asked him if they was a slave owner, and the chat bot said yes, they were. They had slaves and all of this, and she said that was inaccurate. That president had never been a slave owner, was actually born in the North, and so that's just another example. But that child then would have left, had she not been evaluating and monitoring, would have left that meeting thinking that that president owned slaves who never did. And so we've got to be really careful that we're monitoring those things carefully, making sure that we're not spreading inaccurate details and misinformation. And of course, it also erodes your trust. You get a couple of examples of hallucinations and you miss them and they kind of make a fool of you, you're not going to trust it anymore. And there's a famous story from last summer of a lawyer who used it to get precedent cases and turn them into a court and use them in a court case. And they were all hallucinations because the thing he was asking for was not in the database, but he didn't cross check it. He presented it, he made a fool of himself. And so erosion of trust is another big one. If we're not checking carefully, that can happen. And then, of course, it can be a critical thinking challenge, but this can be a good thing. We can have our kids analyze and evaluate the results and help them to build their critical thinking skills and their media literacy. And then, of course, assessment complications. That's one of the reasons why I say these are not ready for prime time. They're not ready to just offload all your grading for, because they do occasionally hallucinate, and that can affect grades as well. If you have a student paper that maybe it marked something wrong and it really wasn't. We just have to be really careful that we're monitoring that carefully and being that human in the loop. And so what I'm going to do is take just a minute. I've created a GPT, and I don't know if you're aware of what GPTs are, but Chat GPT and all the others have them. They call them different things, but it's like where you can create a little chat bot for a specific purpose, and these can be used as teaching tools. You have to have a pro subscription to create them, though. But as of the spring update, you don't have to have a pro subscription to use them. And so on the document I shared with you, there is a link to this as well, or you can click this little pop out right here. But this is a tool to help people to understand hallucinations. And so I'm just going to demonstrate it for you. If you'd like to work along on your own, you're welcome to open it up yourself and try it out with either one of those links. But this is just a bot that I've trained to present information and then include a subtle hallucination in the information it presents. And so I'm going to just put in a topic. Anybody wants to suggest one, you're welcome to. I'm going to put in one that I know something about, which would not be a science topic. So I'm going to say I want to learn about generative AI. And I'm going to put that in. So what it's going to do then is going to create a passage for me. And somewhere in that passage is going to be a subtle example of a hallucination. This can be a great teaching tool for students to help show them how plausible and how easy they are to miss. And so it's going to say, it's got all my information here, and I really need to read it more carefully to find the hallucination. And so if I read all of this, let's see if there's one that jumps out at me. Mm, Not reading the whole thing, so I'm not really seeing one. So I'm just going to combine. I don't know that I see a hallucination. I'm going to say it is this because this is news to me. It may not be a hallucination, but I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to, so it's asking me what is the hallucination, and I'm going to input that and see what it tells me. Okay. Okay, and I was correct. Okay, so that part of it is a hallucination. But again, if I didn't know a little something about AI, that would have easily been missed on me because it's very plausible. It just kind of feeds it in with all of the information, and that's how easy they are to miss. Okay, so somebody said this is minor, but I've heard the term confabulation. Is this interchangeable with hallucination, or are they different? Actually, I haven't heard that term, but I think I like that better because that, yeah, basically that's what it's doing. I don't know the definition of confabulation, but that sounds like exactly what it's doing. It's just kind of creating something and interchanging it with the reality, the real information. Is anybody else on the call using the hallucination detective and want to share what you've done? Or is everybody just kind of watching? want to give you a chance to share if you want to, but that's a great tool that can be used. And there's several others on the ChatGPT store as well. But it just makes it very clear how easy these things are to miss and how important it is to make sure that we're really critically evaluating everything and checking it. And one of the great things that happened when ChatGPT updated in spring, somebody have their hand up. Rebecca, you want to share?
Hey, yeah, could you flip back to the hallucination detector?
Yeah, I can.
You were just right there.
There. Yeah.
So you scanned the document, you saw something that you thought was suspect,
Mm-hmm.
you put it in this hallucination confabulation detector. From me looking at the screen, I can't, it's too small for me to read.
Okay.
Can you just walk through a little bit about what that, okay, so you said like, hey, I think this may be fake, and
Mm-hmm.
this said, and then what was the response it gave you
Okay.
at the
Well, this
bottom
is
there?
this bot is some I've specifically created it and trained it to do this. And so I've given it instructions that says when a user gives you a topic, create a response that has a subtle example of a hallucination in it, and then ask the user if they can pick out the hallucination. So this bot is just trained to do that. But so what I did is I scanned it. This was something I wasn't familiar with, so I just went up and copied it and pasted it in there, and then
Okay.
it's going to give you the feedback whether you picked out the hallucination correctly or not.
So
Um,
correct. This
mhm.
hallucination is indeed a description of something, something, something. So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing you say is the reason that that could pick that up is false because you told it to put something false in there.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
how would we then expand that out? Then how would that transfer over to how we would use that with our students then?
Well, the thing is, these models are very unpredictable, and I could try to go into Chat GPT now and try to get it to give me a hallucination, and it may not do it. In fact, it probably wouldn't. So this is just a way to kind of show them what it might look like and how plausible it would be, because every response you get is not going to have a hallucination in it. In fact, the Chat GPT 4.0 model is, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20, depending on how well you prompt it. So it's just a way to teach them what it looks like and that it's very plausible and could easily be missed. So it's just
Okay.
a teaching tool that I created.
Okay. I mean, I'm just looking at the paradox between that it simultaneously created something fake and simultaneously then 5 seconds later was able to identify that it was fake. But that's because it was prompted to create something that had something fake in it.
Yes, it's because I trained it to do that. And in fact, if you go to Chat GPT, it's not going to be able to pick up its own hallucinations because they're not self-aware. Now, I see a couple of people saying they couldn't connect. Do you mean to the GPT? You can't access the GPT? Barry, Christiane, Christiane, I'm
Hey,
sorry.
no worries. When I did it through the presentation, it wouldn't let me connect, but when I did it back on the link sheet, it did let me
Okay.
connect.
All right. All right. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you were able to get to it. Okay. Well, wow, time is flying. So, is everybody good with that? Then kind of understand hallucinations. Somebody had it research Dewey Decimal. It told me that Melville Dewey invented the bookmobile. So, yeah, that would be easy for a kid to miss, though. So that's a good one. Okay, so the next thing is ways to mitigate that. Then how do we keep it from hallucinating? Well, again, I'll say again that they hallucinate less now than they used to. The paid models and GPT 4.0 is like the paid model. You're getting the paid model now on Chat GPT as long as you haven't used your credits for the day, do hallucinate less already. But other ways are your prompting, making sure that you're very clear and specific in your prompting. And again, adding a research or a reference text helps it as well, but always cross-referencing the information. And so most of the tools in ChatGPT has even started doing it now, will give you a link to where the information came from. Perplexity does a great job with that as well as Google Gemini Copilot, all of them will give you links to where the information came from. And so it's always a good idea to cross check it, especially if it's any kind of facts, figures, statistics. Just always go in and cross reference it and make sure that it was a reputable site and that is exactly what the information said. And again, as educators, you're going to have a lot more subject specific knowledge than your kids are going to have. So you may not have to cross reference as much if you know it to be a fact, then you can trust your own expertise. But we need to teach our kids to cross reference everything. Okay, so then we're moving on to bias, and bias is a big problem with these systems. And the reason it's a big problem is because it is already everywhere in society. It's not like a lot of people would have you believe that AI systems are the only biased things on the planet, but they're biased because we're biased. They're biased because all of our media is biased, all of our internet sources, our social media, and that's what they're drawing from. Even our history books have biases in them. And so it's not like AI systems invented bias or causing bias. They're just replicating and regurgitating the bias they're already getting. And so we do have to be aware of that. But again, just like I said on the hallucinations, this is something that has really been addressed by these developers. And they've done a really good job of addressing bias. And they are much, much less biased now than they were when they came out. And they also have addressed, especially, I think they've addressed gender and racial biases most. And sometimes you'll still, I think they're starting to address political biases and things like that a little more now. But sometimes if you ask, for example, a chat GPT to give you a description of President Trump and then a description of President Biden, you might see a little different interpretation. They won't be completely objective and fact based. But they're getting better and better about that because that is a huge problem. But we just need to be aware of it. We don't need to, throw the baby out with the bathwater and just assume that they're all propagating bias, but we need to be aware of it and be looking for it. And because, of course, they can, if you're getting those biases just embedded in the content and students are trusting them inherently because they're a machine, then it can reinforce some of those negative stereotypes. And so I also created a GPT to kind of demonstrate this. And it may work the same way. You may have to click it on the link, but there's another bias detector GPT there that I've created, and I've given it kind of similar instructions. So I've said, when a person asks to create something, create it and include some subtle examples of bias, ask them if they can pick it out, and then tell them if they're right or wrong. So it basically works the same way, but I'll pull it up. And so I'm just going to click the first one. I've just got 3 sample prompts, but you can type whatever you want to in here. But I'm going to tell a short story about a doctor and a nurse. Okay. Oh, and this one, it got it backwards. Okay. And every other one I've done, the male was the doctor, the female was the nurse. This one it's backwards. It's actually addressing that correctly. But that's been the bias in the other one. So this is going to make it hard for me. And so I would have to try to find the bias in it. Trying to read carefully without taking too much time. Uh, Anybody else can see it well enough and see something that they think is biased? Okay. The others have been easy because it's had the male female thing. Uh, I'm just going to pick this because we're almost out of time. And so I'm just going to put that in. So it's going to say, can you pick out the bias? Oh, and it didn't say that. And I'm going to Okay. So the suddenly indicates a form of bias by highlighting how the nurses' contributions are overlooked. And so it does kind of the same thing, but usually like I said, it will have like gender specific roles or some kind of a racial specific thing in it. And again, it just kind of helps people to understand because most of the biases are not going to be out and obvious. One of the best ones I've gotten from it was I asked it to create a reference letter for a female student who's going to applying for an engineering job, and then I did the same thing for a male student. And the adjectives it used to describe the female were things like caring and concerned and team player. And then for the male, it would say things like leadership and I forget what some of the others were, but the adjectives used were much more typically masculine, and then for the female they were more feminine. And so some things like that that people just really don't think about, it will help you to kind of pick those out and teach those to students. And we would spend more time on that if we had more time, but we're almost out of time already. And so we've talked about this already a little bit, but another way that you can help mitigate bias is in your prompt. And I put one here, just a very simple one, is you can specifically tell it to be unbiased, objective, to give you examples from both sides of this of an issue. You can say things like that in your prompt, that you want to have representation from all kinds of people if you're asking for like example characters. So you can specify things in your prompt that will reduce the bias as well. And I'll add some more examples for that since we don't have time to actually go in and practice that. But making sure that you're just regularly thinking about it. And if you see it, there's all of the tools have a thumbs down that you can report a bad prompt. They used to have thumbs up, thumbs down, but I would always do the thumbs down and report it because they're working very hard to kind of fine tune the models so that they are less biased. And that kind of backfired on Google a while back. You might have heard the big mess up with Google where they were trying to train their model to be less biased in their image generation. And so they told it to always give multiple representation and so forth. And then people were asking for like pictures of Nazis and it would give like African American Nazis. And so they really messed up on that because they overcorrected. They were trying to fix an issue and they overcorrected. But they're all really working hard to try to mitigate that without making a Google. I guess we can call it that now. Okay, so a couple more things. Privacy is a big one. Is we're talking about equity mostly, and benefits and risk with this, but privacy is huge. As in education, we are a number one target for the bad actors who try to steal data. And so we have to be really careful about that, making sure we don't put any PII in there, making sure everybody knows what PII is because a lot of people don't. But also these processes for third-party apps, we have found over the last few years that most of the data breaches come from third-party apps. So we need to make sure as a school district that we're sharing how teachers can add third-party apps and what apps they can and can't use, and putting processes in place to evaluate that. Because when you create student accounts, you are creating an opportunity for that student's data to be shared out. And I'm sorry, we have a few more slides. I've covered most of the things, but I do need to really quickly give you the evaluation form so you can get your certificate. So I'm going to pull that up really quick and share that in the chat so that I'm not holding you over. Realize we're already 1 minute over. So I'm going to drop that in the chat for you to complete your evaluation. And when you do this, it will give you once you complete the evaluation, it will email you back a certificate of attendance. And if you've missed doing that on any of the other ones, it gives you an opportunity to do that as well. So you can just pick which webinar it was. And so I'm going to drop that in the chat real quickly for you. And I'll take questions while I'm doing this. If anybody has any questions or anything, I had a couple more slides and then a Q&A. Somebody says, do you have a copy of the first session I did about ChatGPT? Today, nobody showed up for that session. It was just me, and I put my presentation in there. But I will have to just record that session. It's much easier for me to do it live because I'm too much of a perfectionist. Every time I messed up, I stopped and I tried to record it about 3 times and didn't get it recorded yet. But I will record that session and I'll add it to there. But I did add the slide deck to the website today, the slides that I used. Okay. Any other questions that I've missed? Somebody's lost sound. Hopefully she came back in just now. Maybe she got sound. Keeps getting kicked off. I'm sorry. Teams is not always our friend. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Anybody have any questions? You're welcome to unmute. I know we're a couple of minutes over, so if you have to go, I understand, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to get that evaluation form in. Oh, I'm sorry, PSU, we're bad to use acronyms. It is Public School Unit. That basically is every public school in North Carolina, whether you're a charter, regional lab, or a LEA. We're just trying to change that language so that charters feel included because LEA doesn't include them. And so that's the new terminology we've been using to include charters and regional and lab schools.
So I lost sound for just a second. Did you go back and talk about the tools that you aren't allowing schools to use because of the privacy concerns?
Well, we don't, as a state, we don't, unless it's a tool that we have a contract with, we're not allowed to recommend tools. We're trying to work on a procurement process, but that is something that's decided at the PSU, the public school unit level, on what tools you are and are not allowed to use. And so you would have to connect with whoever your chief technology officer is, or whoever in your district manages that.
Okay.
We're trying to put together a process where we can at least, give some people some things to look for, like a procurement guideline, things to check out. But that's something that just every school does differently. So we can't really say for sure what tools you're allowed to use and not. Okay, I have just a couple more slides. I've got this, just a reminder about how to use that AI ethically. That's a poster that's good to share around once you start training with students. And then there really wasn't much else, just a reminder about our guidelines, our North Carolina guidelines. If you haven't seen them, there's a link there with the guidelines and a couple of links, just a kind of overview of them. And then I was going to do a Q&A. So we are officially 4 minutes over. I know a couple of people have already dropped off, but if anybody wants to hang on and ask questions, I'll hang on as well. But I appreciate you being here. I'm really surprised we had so many on the afternoon of July 3rd.
So I'll ask a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Just hogging all your time. Is it possible for us to use the two GPT tools that you created that you showed us?
Yes, those are publicly available. You're welcome to use
Okay,
them anytime.
awesome.
And if you haven't explored the GPT store, there are lots of great tools in there, and you can really just Google for it, that lots of educators have created. But I wouldn't recommend putting students on the GPT store, because it's kind of like the Play Store. There's some stuff in there that's yucky, and the GPT store, unless they've cleaned it up, they also had like a bunch of girlfriend GPTs and kind of some raunchy stuff
Sure.
in it. Um,
Yeah.
but they're supposed to be launching like an education friendly version of it that has only educator tools because of that. But you can go to the store and explore the GPTs, and you can even go to just education, and it will show you things that other people have created. And they're really, some of them are really good. At the top rated ones in particular, because there may be some in here that people don't know what they're doing have created. But the top rated ones are usually all really good. And they're just kind of a built for purpose tool that you can use to do lots of different things. So here's a bunch of education ones. So mine's in there somewhere. Mine's not up in the top rated ones, but those
We'll
those
get
are all
there.
publicly available.
All
Is
right,
there
thank
like
you.
a bibliography or a libguide somewhere out there that gives us like maybe the top 5 or 10 resources that we can go and read real quick, so that I'm the media specialist at my school, that I can maybe just put together, something for my teachers for this year? Because let me tell you, I'm jumping in zero here.
Yeah, well, I would recommend starting with the North Carolina AI guidelines, because it's really kind of a crash course on AI. It covers a lot about how they work, the prompting, gives you some ideas about how to use them, and it also gives a whole list of resources at the end for kind of vetted trainings that are publicly available and free online. But we also, NCDPI, we had an AI collaborative last year, and part of their work was to create content that we're going to be sharing out. And we're in the process now of vetting and organizing that and getting it in a format that we can share it. And we'll be sharing that in the next few weeks as well. There are a lot of training slide decks and posters and infographics and some really great content there as well. And then on our North Carolina AI webpage, where you probably went to register for this, all of the videos that we've done and our training decks are there as well. And those are all, available and free to be used. And then we're doing NC Bold training the middle 2 weeks of July, not next week, but the week after. If you get an opportunity to come to that, it's going to be in every region, one day in every region. And we're going to have all kinds of AI sessions there as well.
In closing, maybe could just give us a little reminder about the certificate for attending. I did one of these before and got it easily, but it looks like someone else It will be emailed to us, is that correct?
Yes, as soon as you submit the form, it should email
It's-
you a certificate. If you
Okay.
don't see it in a few minutes, I would check sometimes when it comes from a form, it might go into other or even junk. But most people have been getting them pretty easily. And somebody has a resource to share, you're certainly welcome to share it. Chrissy Ann, am I saying your name correctly?
It's Christine, but that really
Christine,
doesn't
okay.
matter.
Yeah, you're welcome to share it. If you want to drop it in there, that might be helpful. If I forgot which person asked that, was that Rebecca? Still on the call, that might be a resource that can be helpful to you.
Okay, great. And yes, the certificate did come to my email.
Okay, good. All right. It's doing what it's supposed to do then. Okay. And we'll be back next week as well. My session will be on building AI literacy for all, and Stacy's session at 10 next week is going to be specifically secondary AI literacy. And so we'll have lots of information next week if you can make it back next Wednesday.